Watch this.
Idaho's longest-serving death row inmate is still serving on death row after his execution was unsuccessful this morning. The convicted murderer, who is supposedly wary of needles, is alive tonight because of one.
I certainly believe that we don't want to be killing in the state's name in return for another killing.
In this case, thoughts and prayers seem to work for those outside the prison. The opposition to the death penalty is growing across the country, even if the numbers were few today outside Boise. Another proposed law that even lawmakers say might not be needed. This one gives mental health professionals who have religious beliefs the ability to deny clients they don't agree with. Well, it took nearly 50 years and decades of appeals, which included 2 reversals and 3 death sentences, to get to today. Thomas Creech, Idaho's longest-serving death row inmate, was scheduled to be executed at 10 a.m. But that didn't happen because medical staff couldn't get an IV line inserted. So this evening, Thomas Creech is back in his cell on death row. This is the first unsuccessful execution in state history. Here is what happened as we hear from those inside the execution chamber.
Early Wednesday morning, Idaho Department of Correction medical staff prepared for Idaho's first execution in more than a decade.
Our medical team did a physical assessment of Mr. Creech. After that assessment, they had communicated to me as well as Warden Richardson that they believed and had confidence that they would be able to establish venous access on Mr. Creech.
At 9:50 a.m., witnesses, including 4 members of the media, were brought into the execution chambers. Creech's wife, Leanne, and we're told his stepson were brought into a separate area. At 10 o'clock, staff brought Creech into the room on a gurney and placed him on the execution table. A few minutes later, he was covered with a white sheet. It's reported he made eye contact with his family, even subtly waved his hand while his arms were strapped to the gurney. At 10:04, the medical team started their assessments, hooked up an EKG machine, and prepped Creech's right arm for the IV.
In the walls, there are some holes where the IV tubing goes into the medication room or the medical team room, which is actually behind the execution chamber and is not visible to us.
At 10:11, that first IV in his right arm was established, but 2 minutes later, medical staff said it was unsuccessful, so they tried again. When that didn't work, they moved to the left arm. At 10:31, they moved to his legs.
What they encountered in some instances was an access issue, but in others where they could establish access, they were unable. It was a vein quality issue that made them not confident in their ability to administer chemicals through the IV site once established.
At 10:41, members of the medical team left the room to get more supplies, including needles. At 10:54, Creech lifted his head from the gurney and told the medical staff,
My legs hurt a bit.
When Mr. Creech noted discomfort with his leg, he was experiencing a cramp, and the medical team worked to try to assuage that.
They tried again, but they were not able to get a needle into a vein after a total of 8 attempts.
And at that point, they removed the sheet that was covering his legs, took off his orange, slide-on style shoes, pulled up his green scrub-style pants, and then worked around the hook and loop style straps that were restraining both of his ankles.
At 10:58 a.m., the prison's warden announced the execution would be halted. He pulled Director of Correction Josh Tewald aside. It's unclear what they talked about.
This isn't a do-it-at-any-cost process. That our first objective is to carry this out with dignity, professionalism, and respect. When it reaches a point in that process, at any step, where it looks like we're going to be unable to do that, that's when we call it off. It wasn't a difficult decision. It was the right decision.
All witnesses were escorted from the chambers, and Creech was taken back to his cell. His death warrant expires at 11:59 Wednesday night.
Tewald said members of today's medical team, they've done an execution in Idaho before. IDOC's director says Creech was moved from F block at IMSI to medical so his wife could visit him, and they are preparing his longer-term housing unit. State says they're currently considering their next steps, and shortly after the failed execution, Creech's legal team filed a motion to stay his execution once again. And some members of Creech's legal team, well, they were there at the prison today, but not inside as witnesses. They were there joining the small group who showed up to voice their opposition to capital punishment, which usually happens anytime an execution is held. The opinion of the death penalty, whether or not a person should be put to death for killing another person, is the lowest it's been in the last 50 years. Gallup has been tracking this through polling since 1936. The number of Americans in favor of it peaked in 1994 at 80%. In 2023, just 53% supported the death penalty. And today, a small part of the 44% of those against it use this highly publicized moment to make their case at the correctional facility south of Boise. They showed up just before 9 a.m., parking just off the pavement along Pleasant Valley Road. Most arrived as individuals to gather together in a gravel lot inside the gate of the Idaho State Correctional Complex. Buffeted against the wind and surrounded by members of the media, including a live stream.
Mr. Creech was sentenced to death in procedures that are now clearly unconstitutional.
The group would soon number a little more than a dozen.
Well, I wish it was more. I think we'd make a bigger impact if it was more people.
Their reason for being here was obvious, but not absolute.
Actually,
Doesn't deserve.
While most were strongly opposed to the death penalty,
Why do we come out today? Because I believe very strongly in the sanctity of human life.
and actually it's biblical, you know, thou shalt not kill.
some weren't so sure.
It's really hard for me to take a stand on it. I just don't know how I feel about it.
Like Brian Rhodes,
I have not.
who isn't much of a protester,
First time.
but sought out the company of others to sort out his subjective struggle.
Sometimes I think that maybe, but then there's other times I'm like, I'm not sure this is what the maker wanted us to do. I don't know.
You are a religious person?
Yes,
Okay. So obviously that weighs on this.
a little bit. So you struggle with that component versus the justice component.
But you felt enough to come out here.
I did. So I guess I'm out here just to kind of support the people that are out here.
Like Jan Powell,
This is probably the first time that I've been publicly active about the death penalty.
who, as a Catholic, worries capital punishment is just continuing an unbreakable chain.
If we're killing because somebody is killed, that doesn't stop anything. It just keeps going, and now we're culpable for the person that we've killed.
Which is why Ralph Mellon is out here again, like he was 12 years ago, the last time Idaho had an execution.
You know, no question that Mr. Creech has done some bad things, but I don't want to, use the state's name and kill back again.
Like everyone else who showed up, Ralph had no illusions of impacting today's proceedings, but future ones.
Well, nationally, I think we're getting more discussion about this issue.
As for the other side of this issue, well, that can be found on the other side of this barbed wire fence.
I'm shocked, to be honest with you.
One man standing solo.
I came out here to be a supporter, to support in what I believe, you know.
He wanted his opinion known, but not his face.
I understand that, he's a gentle guy now, he's older, but he's suspected of killing 42 people. And then everybody, wants to spare his life. How about the victims? How about the victims' families? All my beliefs is, if you take a life, there should be some consequences. So it's my belief, and that's why I showed up here today.
Amazing grace.
And as the scheduled hour arrived, nobody was aware of what was or what wasn't happening on the inside. But that didn't matter. And as they slowly slipped away, seemingly as they came, they were comforted knowing they weren't alone in their reason for showing up.
To talk about other ways for individuals to pay for their crimes other than with their lives.
Make no difference, but more difference, is make your voice known to the politicians themselves.
As we mentioned, the national conversation seems to be having a slight impact. Last year, there were 24 executions in just 5 states, the majority of them taking place in Texas and Florida. 2023 also saw only 21 people sentenced to death, according to the Death Penalty Information Center. 29 states have either abolished the death penalty or put it on pause for the time being. However, some states Like Florida and Idaho, well, they're going the opposite direction by reinstalling options for the death penalty. Last year, the Sunshine State went against a U.S. Supreme Court decision and now allows the death penalty in child rape convictions. Florida is also now allowing a death sentence without a unanimous jury. Meanwhile, here in Idaho, a bill to allow the death penalty in cases of lewd conduct with a child, which would also go against the Supreme Court ruling, well, that passed the Senate 2 weeks ago. And last year, we reinstituted the option of a firing squad in death sentences. Some of you may be wondering why that wasn't waiting in the wings today. Several weeks ago, in fact, the same day the lewd conduct death penalty bill cleared the Senate, we got this text message from Robert in Boise. I don't understand what happened to the capital punishment of death by firing squad. It was signed into law by the governor last year. Creech and Pizzuto, the death penalty there, they were being held up by, among other things, the drugs that we use for the lethal injection. So why did we sign this bill and why is it not being carried out? Well, Robert is right. Governor Little signed House Bill 186 into law last session, making a firing squad a legal method of execution in Idaho for the first time since 2009. But the law says the firing squad is only used if the state can't get the drugs needed to perform a lethal injection or if a court finds lethal injection is unconstitutional. This law was instigated by the state's inability to get those lethal drugs to put Gerald Pizzuto to death in 2022. His execution was put off 2 times because of that. Well, that wasn't the case today. They just couldn't find a vein. So with the death warrant still in effect for the rest of today, could they just employ the firing squad with Creech? Well, the director of Idaho Department of Correction says no.
We do not have the facilities or physical capabilities of carrying out firing squad. And we'll continue to work on those efforts. But again, our efforts have been focused on carrying out the death penalty under the methods that are prescribed under state law today.
So how close are we to the firing squad being a viable option? Well, the legislature allocated $750,000 to build a facility, but we haven't heard back yet from the Department of Correction on their progress on that facility. As you can imagine, they've been a bit busy today. Not being able to find a vein is the same reason Alabama resorted to nitrogen hypoxia to carry out a death sentence just about a month ago. What about that? Tewalt says that's not an option in Idaho either because it's actually against the law. They would have to make that change in statute in order to make that an option, kind of like they did for the firing squad. There are consistently 2 lists where Idaho ranks dead last or close to it. That would be spending per student and doctors per capita. For every 100,000 Idahoans, we currently have less than 200 doctors. In comparison, Massachusetts, who tops that list, has more than double that number. This bearing at the bottom of the barrel, well, it isn't a secret, even to our lawmakers, who many point to as one of the reasons we're in this predicament. You can see Idaho's abortion laws if you want that answer. However, their answer to solve the problem seems to be, pass more laws. For example, today, they set out to empower counselors and therapists with deeply held religious beliefs with the legal ability to deny a client. Well, surely that protection will draw the emotionally intelligent mental health professionals to the gem state, right? Well, the Senate floor gave it a green light.
To make a living is to know what you're willing to sacrifice.
That's a business decision.
But Idaho senators say some
there needs to be trust.
Shouldn't even be up for debate.
No Idahoan should be required to check their moral or ethical principles at the door of their profession.
Senate Bill 1352 draws the line at firmly held religious beliefs because supporters say counselors and therapists are forced to justify actions they morally oppose, making for a bad relationship for both client and counselor.
And that's what it's all about.
Senator Carl Bierke is the bill's sponsor.
If you're looking for a counselor, a therapist, a wedding counselor, couples counselor, you want to find a match.
But Democrats were quick to point out the profession is already guided by a code of ethics, and it outlines a mismatch of morals does not mean an omission of service.
Talking to the profession about how you can find balance with your own values as well as your clients.
But under this bill, a counselor denying service on the base of religion cannot face repercussions.
In this way, they are protected.
That includes civil claims, criminal charges, and loss of license.
This bill is basically allowing a counselor to get off the hook if they violate their ethics.
Republican Representative Jeff Schroeder argues,
and I'm going to hire a counselor.
This bill could lead to discrimination in the hiring process.
Okay, before I hire you to take this caseload of domestic violence or alcohol counseling, I need to know if you're going to have any sincerely held religious beliefs that are going to cause us a problem. I don't know if we can do that. I mean, this thing is just going to generate litigation 6 ways to Sunday.
But the intention of the bill is to protect people from a situation where no one wins, specifically a client needing to justify bad behavior.
He really feels strongly that if he were only to have an affair on his wife, things in this life would be so much better. And he's looking for that counselor that he's working with to validate.
I just don't think that's the way counseling works, but I'm not a counselor, so maybe I'm wrong. But this is about people, gay people. That's what we're really talking about.
Senator Ruckde argues the intent to protect does the opposite. It's a notion rejected by the majority, along with the industry's code of ethics.
That's not who sets the policy for licensure in the state of Idaho. We set the policy.
Debate against the bill ran well into voting.
The secretary will call the roll.
It passed easily,
Ruckde,
23-11,
Schroeder,
with no moral sacrifices,
Taylor,
down to the last word.
60 seconds to explain your vote.
I cannot support this particular bill until we can have the same type of passion towards respecting all Idahoans' personally held and sincerely held beliefs. So I'll be voting no.
That Senate bill now moves to a House committee. It is halfway to the governor's desk. Multiple lawmakers said they know counselors, have family in the profession, or have polled constituents to get an idea of what they think. And some of those counselors say they want this protection, while other lawmakers said the counselors they talk to think this is a terrible idea. Religious counselors also, Brian, do exist.
Sure.
Schroeder pointed this out, and in state law, it's not the same license. I don't even think they have a license.
Right.
So he said, if you want to go be a religious counselor, that's awesome. Go be one. But this is a separate type of work. And if you want to work in this field, there's different rules for it.
And I tend to agree with Senator Ruckde there. I'm not a counselor, but I guess if you're looking for a counselor to agree with everything you want them, that you're doing everything correctly, you're not really looking for counseling at that point.
I actually had to ask other people in our newsroom today when I was writing this, because I'm like, is that how it works?
Yeah, no.
And I guess it's a case-by-case thing. I guess every counselor, therapist is different, but I think that would be a unique situation.
And he's probably right about the last thing he said as well. All right, thank you very much, Andrew.
Some beautiful views there, but we're not really going to see a whole lot of the sunshine today, with the exception of Twin Falls. Twin Falls still looks to see some of those clear skies. You can see clouds across the region, more of those mild temperatures after warming up a bit from yesterday. Some light moisture across the region, but you can see a lot of the clouds confined to the northern and western areas, which is why Twin Falls was looking to see that sunshine. Here's our high temperatures for today. You can see making it into the 50s in Treasure Valley, spots in the 30s in the mountains for the highs, and that close to that 50-degree mark over in the Magic Valley. However, tomorrow we are expecting a lot of changes due to a cold front that will be moving through the region. You can see lots of rain will be coming with that, and also a low pressure center will be moving closer as well. Ahead of this cold front, though, will be some very powerful winds, and at some of these ranges that we're expecting for the gusts, they could be potentially damaging. So as we look across the region, you can see some of those gusts may be moving towards southeastern Oregon at their peak around the afternoon hours. You can see it getting a little bit higher towards Ontario. But as we go into those late afternoon hours, you'll also see the wind gusts pick up in mountain locations, which we typically don't see. And then for Magic Valley spots, we're not expecting wind gusts quite this high. We're also expecting very busy weather in the form of rain and snow as well. So visibility will be limited at times with this cold front, but things staying very busy tomorrow and staying active throughout your 7-day forecast as well.
A lot of comments today on the unsuccessful execution out at the Idaho Correctional Facility. We'll get to those just in a moment. I want to start with this one from JoJo in reference to whether counselors or therapists can deny service to somebody they don't agree with religiously or whatever. As a flight attendant, I'm morally opposed to serving unhealthy sodas, especially at 6 a.m. No one needs Dr. Pepper at 6 a.m. Can I deny them services as it goes against the very core of my values? Simplifying it a bit, but that is the gist behind some of this, I guess. Sure. Thanks, JoJo. Wanting to have multiple ways to execute people says a lot about the condition of our society, says Rod in Boise, and that's correct. That's a very good point. A lot of long ones here. They had Thomas Creech strapped down. Seems like could have gone directly into his neck, into his heart. They didn't see much of a professional medical team to not be able to do the job they knew they needed to be done. As a family member of a victim of someone on death row, I don't believe in my hard-earned tax dollars being used to keep this convicted murderer alive and comfortable. That's from Kitty in Boise. There's a procedure that they have to follow with this, a medical procedure, an ethical procedure. They can't hurt somebody, can't torture them. That's why they have to do it the way they do it. And that's why they called it off, because they couldn't do it in an ethical way today. Leg cramps, unable to find a vein. Sounds like somebody played the dehydration card perfectly. Also, those 44% who oppose the death penalty, well, they're more than welcome to pay for his continued incarceration for the rest of us, says Randy and Starr. It's actually been proven that life in prison is actually cheaper than the decades of appeals it takes to put someone to death who is on death row. I completely agree with that lone man at the prison. The people who are against it would think twice if one of their loved ones was killed by a monster like that, says Steve. Finally, why so much sympathetic media coverage for the serial murderer? Well, that was what was happening out there today, and that's what we do. We cover what is happening. We'll see you tomorrow.